Hi everybody, today we'll be talking about the adjective clause in other words, the relative clauses. And so today I would like to start with the relative pronouns at first. And we have two types of the clauses here. One of them is the main clause and the other one is the relative clause. And so we can use relative clauses as an adjective. And so the other name given to them is, for that reason, the adjective clauses. And so what are the relative pronouns we have? As you see, who, which, where, whom, when, why, whose, and that. And so we call them the relative pronouns, and so they are used after the word that they describe. For example, I'm going to show you the chart in a few minutes time, and so let's see the example of it. The money hasn't been found yet. If you just omit the which sentence, which was stolen from the bank, that means you have a main clause, and so the money hasn't been found yet. I come and tell you the money hasn't been found, and you ask me, teacher, which money you're talking about? And so I'm just explaining it using an adjective. How can I create it? I use the money. And so if I think about the money, what is that? It is a thing. And for that reason, it's an object, and for that reason I use which. And so these are like the question words, as you see. Who is used for the people, which for the objects, where for the places, whom for the people, and when for the time, and so why for the reason, and who's for the passivity, and that to replace which and who. And so which money? The money which was stolen from the bank, and here in Turkish we call it anası mezar dikecekmiş. You remember the sıfat fields, and so that's the same thing in English. And there are two types of the relative clauses. One of them is called the defined and the other one is called the non-defining. And so if you want to use the defined relative clauses, that means you need to give relevant information, important and necessary information. But in non-defined relative clauses you give additional, extra, irrelevant and unnecessary information. And so for that reason you have to separate the relative clause from the main clause by using two commas. And so you use the relative clause between the two commas, and then you create the relative clause structure separating it from the main clause. And so let's see the examples. The man wants to do business with you. I come and tell you, hey, the students, the man wants to do business with you, and you ask me, teacher, which man? And so I said that the man who will come to see you tomorrow. And so you'll understand that tomorrow when the man comes, you're gonna understand that that's the man that is looking for you to do business with you. And so, but here's an example about the non-defining ones. For example, Mr. Jones, who has two little daughters, wants to do business with you. Is it relevant? Is it important for you to know that he has two little daughters? You're gonna do business with that person, but you don't need to know anything about these two little daughters. And so it's a non-defining. And as you see, as non-defining, you have to put two commas just before and after the sentence so that you can separate it from the main clause. And so the main clause is Mr. Jones wants to do business with you. That's the main clause. And what's the relative clause? Additional, irrelevant information, unnecessary information is he has two little daughters. But here, look at the explanation. And that is never used in non-defined relative clauses. For example, here you can say the man that will come to see you tomorrow wants to do business with you, to replace who. But here you can't say Mr. Jones that has two little daughters. And so if it's a non-defined relative clause, you can't use that instead of who or which. And so there may be a time difference between the relative clause and the main clause. They don't necessarily mean to have the same tenses or tense structures. We can just use the past simple and the present continuous, blah blah, or future or past in the relative clause and the main clause. What do I mean? For example, the relative clause takes was wrong, but the main clause takes is. Or the relative clause takes was broken, but the main clause takes can be repaired. And so there doesn't need to be any harmony with the in the tenses used with the relative clause and the main clause as well. And so let's have a look at the relative pronouns and why we use them. Let's have a look at the examples. And so all the relative pronouns must be related to the word that comes before them. And so, for example, to be able to decide which one to use here, we use who. What's the reason? Because we say the people. And so if you want to identify the people, you use who. The people who don't know. And so to identify different names, people, animal things, we use who. And what about whom? Whom is the same as who, but the difference is that if you're using here, for example, after who, you can use a subject pronoun, you can use an auxiliary verb, or you can use a verb. But after whom, you can only use a subject pronoun or any kind of proper name like Nissan, like Ahmed, Mehmet, and Selin, etc. You can just use it. And And let's move on with which. And so we use which to define the objects, for example. And so when you think about the hardest question in life, it's an object. And so for the objects, we use which. And so we have one more which. It is used to define the whole sentence. So it defines the whole sentence it comes after. And so, for example, you say, which started the fire in the laboratory? What started the fire? Let's see. Is it the chemistry teacher? No. Is it the chemicals? No. But it is absolutely to do an experiment. The chemistry teacher mixed 2 chemicals yesterday, and this started the fire in the laboratory. And so here which defines all the sentence, just comes before it. And so we can use where, or in which, on which, or at which to define the places. For example, you're talking about the Westminster Cathedral, and so it's some kind of church, and so it's the church where the royal family members hold their wedding ceremonies, and so to define the church we use where. And to define the time or time expressions we use when, the day, the year, the century, etc. we use when to define it. And so why? It is used especially with the word the reason, so it's easy to identify. And so we say, do you know the reason why love is so painful? Wow, so striking. And whose, we use whose for the possessivity. And so after whose, we have to use the noun all the time. You can't use whose without using the nouns. For example, we're talking about J.R.R. Tolkien, and so you say whose, and so you use it for possessivity. And then comes books, the books of J.R.R. Tolkien, or we can say his books, and instead of his, we use whose. And that is used instead of who, whom, and which. In defined relative clauses. In non-defined relative clauses, we can't use that. And so, for example, we say the title of the story. Instead of saying which, normally we're going to use which, you can use that. Or here you can say the people who don't know. You can say the people that don't know. You can use it that way. The man that she was deeply in love with can also be used. And so instead of saying the title of the story which belongs to Ian is succeeding failure, instead of that you can say the title of the story that belongs to Ian is a succeeding failure. And so I have prepared a text about Kafka for you. And so what you're going to do is that I'm going to just do a few of them for you. The credit for making Franz Kafka, internationally famous as a writer of visionary and imaginative fiction, belongs to his friend Max Brod. And so when you have a look at Max Brod, and then you're going to use who, whom, or whose. And so as we have here, the auxiliary word, we use who. Max Brod, who was also a novelist himself, we say. In Kafka's will, Brod was asked to burn all the manuscripts, and so manuscripts is the object, and so it's a thing, and so for that reason we use which hadn't yet been published, and to refrain from republishing those. Here those, again, you're talking about the books or manuscripts, and so you use which were already in print. And so Brod, you're talking about the man, his friend Max Brod, and so who didn't comply with his friend's will, instead edited the manuscripts and had them published. And so you're going to continue with the other activities, and so see ya in the next session that we're going to have together. I'm going to just publicize it, and then I'm going to share it with you when it's ready. Take care. Bye for now.